There's a pattern, and it's been repeated throughout history. Empires rise, they peak, and then they fall. Over the last 500 years, three global superpowers, Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union, followed this exact path, one step after another, and each collapse unfolded in the same pattern. What's chilling? The United States is now on the same trajectory. We are walking down the exact same path as those who came before us, and it's happening faster than anyone dares admit. We're not inching towards this fate, we're already deep into it. The signs are glaring, but few seem to see them. Let's take a look at what happened in Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. They were once the global titans, the superpowers of their time, just like we are now. But despite all their wealth, military dominance, and global influence, they collapsed from within. It wasn't war that ended their reigns. It was a collapse driven by economic exhaustion. The mistakes they made were not immediate. They didn't just wake up one day and lose it all. Instead, their declines were gradual, invisible to most until it was too late. And right now, the United States is repeating those same mistakes. We've stretched our military too thin. We're overburdened with debt. The dollar is losing its power. Our social fabric is fraying. It's happening in front of us. Yet we continue on with business as usual, believing that we're different, that we're immune. But the math says otherwise, and history proves it. This isn't fear-mongering. This is just history's echo. We're already deep inside the pattern. Let's begin with Spain, the first empire to set the stage for the fall of great powers. In the 1500s, Spain was at the height of its power. It had conquered the Americas, amassed incredible wealth from gold and silver, and established a military presence that dominated Europe. The Spanish crown had a vast empire that spanned the globe. By the year 1600, Spain controlled the world's most valuable resources, and its currency, the Spanish real, was the de facto global reserve currency. At this point, Spain seemed invincible. They were the wealthiest empire on earth, their economy booming with resources flooding in from their colonies. The silver mined from the Americas filled Spanish coffers, fueling further expansion and military conquests. Spain had it all: the riches, the global power, the dominance. They believed their position was permanent, but this is where the cracks started to show. Despite all their wealth, Spain couldn't sustain their empire. The first step in their downfall was military overextension. Spain was engaged in wars on multiple fronts against the Ottoman Empire, France, England, and in the Americas. They had military commitments across 4 continents, and the cost was staggering. Half of Spain's revenue was spent on defense, yet it was never enough. They were stretched too thin, fighting wars they couldn't afford. As military spending increased, the second problem emerged: currency debasement. Spain began mixing copper with silver. This led to inflation. Merchants refused to accept the silver at its face value. The purchasing power of Spanish coins collapsed. In less than a century, Spain went from the wealthiest empire on earth to a bankrupt nation. The silver mines ran dry, the military was, and the once great empire became a shadow of its former self. This, too, is the beginning of a familiar pattern. Fast forward to the 1900s, and Britain stood as the largest empire the world had ever known. The sun never set on the British Empire, they proudly boasted. The British Empire controlled vast territories across the globe, spanning continents. Their currency, the pound sterling, was the world's reserve currency, and the City of London was the heart of global finance. For over a century, Britain seemed invincible. They were the architects of the modern financial system. Their empire extended to every corner of the earth. The British Navy ruled the seas. Britain was untouchable. But as history has shown, even the most powerful empires are susceptible to the same fatal flaws. In 1914, the outbreak of World War I marked the beginning of Britain's decline. To fund the war effort, Britain borrowed extensively from the United States. The cost of the war was enormous, totaling more than $40 billion, which in today's terms is $1 trillion. Britain had to sell off assets and borrow from foreign nations to keep its empire intact. By the end of the war, Britain owed billions to the United States, and the nation was financially crippled. The post-war period saw Britain facing another monumental challenge: currency debasement. 1931, after attempting to restore it in the 1920s, the pound's value plummeted, and the nation's finances were in ruins. The British Empire began to unravel as former colonies gained independence. By 1970, Britain had lost much of its former territories. Britain's fall was characterized by overextension, mounting debt, and the collapse of its currency, just like Spain before it. The British Empire, like Spain, failed to recognize the unsustainable nature of its global commitments, and when the collapse came, it was swift and brutal. The Soviet Union rose to superpower status after World War II, becoming the world's leading communist state. With nuclear weapons, massive military control over Eastern Europe, and satellites spanning the globe, the USSR appeared to be a formidable force. For over 40 years, they competed directly with the United States for global influence, striving to match America's technological advances and military capabilities. But just like Spain and Britain before them, the USSR's greatness came at a staggering cost. The Soviet Union's downfall didn't come from a military defeat, it collapsed from within, driven by the same issues that led to the demise of other empires: overextension and economic stagnation. Looking at the United States today, it's impossible to ignore the striking similarities between our current trajectory and the paths followed by Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. We are deep into the same sequence that has led to the collapse of previous global superpowers, and history is playing out once again. This isn't just an accident. The same patterns that doomed the empires before us are now unfolding in the US, and we're already at Stage 5. Stage 1 for America: military overextension. Just like the empires before us, the US has spread itself thin across the globe. With military bases in over 80 countries, we're not just defending our borders, we're managing conflicts from Europe to Asia to the Middle East. We're deeply committed to NATO, protecting South Korea, defending Taiwan, and countering threats from Russia and China. These military commitments, though necessary for maintaining global influence, come with an astronomical price tag. The US spends more than $800 billion annually on defense, more than the next 10 countries combined. Yet, just like Spain in the 1500s, we can't maintain this level of spending indefinitely. Stage 2: currency debasement. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency for decades, but since the Nixon administration abandoned the gold standard in 1971, the dollar's value has been eroding. The money supply has increased 400% since the year 2000, and since 2020, the US has printed over $6 trillion. This massive inflationary pressure means that the purchasing power of the dollar has been cut by more than 90% since 1971. We're not mixing copper into silver coins like Spain did, but the end result is the same: a devalued currency that undermines the strength of the nation. This is where the cracks are starting to show. Just as Spain and Britain did, the US has overextended its military, debased its currency, and buried itself in debt. We're running up against the same walls they faced, and they're crumbling quickly. Debt, an invisible anchor, is slowly dragging the United States toward collapse. This is where the situation begins to resemble the downfall of Spain, Britain, and the Soviet Union. The United States is caught in a crushing debt spiral, and the math says it can't last much longer. The numbers are staggering. As of 2025, the US national debt stands at over $36 trillion, more than 120% of GDP. And we're spending more on interest payments than on defense. The annual interest bill is approaching $1 trillion, a sum that continues to grow as more debt is issued. This isn't sustainable. Just like Spain, which declared bankruptcy 4 times in 40 years, or Britain, which borrowed until it collapsed, the US is in a dangerous debt trap. When Spain couldn't pay its bills in the 1500s, they resorted to printing money, devaluing their currency, and borrowing from anyone who would lend. Britain too went on a borrowing spree after World War I, only to see their empire crumble under the weight of their debt. The Soviet Union's collapse in 1991 was due to its inability to sustain its debt and military commitments. We are now on the same path. The problem isn't just the amount of debt, it's the structural issues that it creates. Borrowing to pay interest on previous debt is a recipe for disaster. Just like Britain had to abandon the gold standard when they couldn't maintain it, the US will eventually face the same fate: a choice between defaulting or inflating the currency to unsustainable levels. This isn't some distant future issue. The signs are already here, and the United States is teetering on the edge, unable to escape the trap set by its own debt. The collapse of empires throughout history follows a very predictable pattern, and the United States is no different. At the core of this pattern is the loss of productive capacity, a gradual erosion of the ability to manufacture, innovate, and sustain an economy that can support its military and social commitments. In the mid-20th century, America was a manufacturing powerhouse. Factories churned out cars, steel, electronics, and all the goods that fueled the post-war economic boom. The US was a leader in innovation, creating everything from the first moon landing to the personal computer revolution. But look at the America of today. The manufacturing base has been gutted. We no longer produce the bulk of the goods we consume. Instead, We rely on imports for everything from basic consumer goods to military equipment. The numbers speak volumes. In 2025, the U.S. imports over $800 billion more than it exports annually. China, Mexico, Vietnam, and other countries now hold the factory jobs and the manufacturing capacity that once drove America's prosperity. This dependency on foreign supply chains leaves us vulnerable. We rely on foreign nations for everything from medicine to steel. And as we've seen in recent years, even something as basic as medical equipment can become scarce when global supply chains break down. Just like Spain relied on silver from the Americas instead of fostering internal innovation, the U.S. has relied on cheap goods from abroad while neglecting its own productive capacity. This is a dangerous path. When the wealth stops flowing in, whether it's through foreign investment or trade, America's ability to produce goods and services will be the first casualty. And when that happens, the collapse becomes inevitable. The loss of productive capacity is not just an economic problem, it's a national security issue. When an empire loses its ability to make the things it needs to defend itself, the writing is on the wall. Every empire that has collapsed throughout history has witnessed a deep and rapid social decay. Once an empire begins to falter economically, it often sees a breakdown in its social fabric. Trust erodes, crime increases, and the public's faith in its institutions disappears. In the US, we are already witnessing the early signs of social decay. Crime rates are climbing in cities across the country. Once thriving communities are now battlegrounds between gangs and law enforcement. Homelessness is rampant in major cities like Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco, where hundreds of thousands of people live on the streets, while the wealth gap grows wider every day. Meanwhile, millions of hardworking Americans are increasingly disconnected from their government. Trust in political institutions, from Congress to the White House, is at an all-time low. People are frustrated by political gridlock, government corruption, and a system that seems to favor the wealthy elite. The lack of faith in the system has fueled growing political extremism and civil unrest, leading to violent protests and division among the population. Just like the decline of Spain, where the country's nobility lived in luxury while the masses struggled, or the fall of Britain, which witnessed rampant poverty and an inability to adapt to changing global dynamics, America is now seeing its own version of social decay. We have a growing class of people who feel left behind, hopeless and angry. With rising inflation and a growing wealth divide, this disillusionment is only intensifying. In the end, social decay doesn't just hurt the economy, it makes the entire system unsustainable. When people no longer believe in their institutions, when they no longer see a future for themselves or their children, everything starts to break down. And once that process begins, it's hard to reverse. As we reach the final stages of this collapse pattern, it's essential to take action. Knowledge is power. And now that you understand the pattern, you have the chance to prepare for what's coming. History shows us that these crises don't happen overnight. They take time to unfold. But when they do, the fallout is swift and unforgiving. You can no longer afford to trust that everything will be fine, or that the system will magically correct itself. Spain, Britain, and the USSR all made that mistake. They thought their empires were invincible, and they paid the price for ignoring the warning signs. The US is no different. We're at a crossroads, and what happens next will depend on how we respond. Here's what you can do. 1. Diversify your investments. If your wealth is tied up in traditional stocks, bonds, or real estate, it's time to rethink your strategy. With the dollar under pressure and the economy strained, you should look into diversifying into assets that perform well during times of uncertainty, such as gold, silver, and other hard assets. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. 2. Reduce debt and save aggressively. The debt spiral the US is caught in is a serious risk to everyone. If you're carrying any debt, especially high-interest debt, now is the time to pay it down. Saving more aggressively will also provide a buffer when the storm hits. Every dollar you save today could be worth much more tomorrow. 3. Build a self-sufficient financial plan. With the social fabric starting to unravel, it's crucial to focus on building your own financial resilience. Don't rely on the system. Focus on developing a side hustle, improving your skill set, and creating alternative income streams. Look into alternative investments and real estate to secure your future. 4. Stay informed and adapt. The next few years are going to be crucial. Stay informed. Track the political and economic shifts happening globally. If you can see the changes coming, you can better prepare for them. Knowledge will be your best weapon in weathering the storm. The good news? You have time to act, but the window is closing fast. Don't wait until it's too late. The patterns are clear, and now you know what's coming. Prepare now, and you won't be caught off guard when the storm finally hits. The clock is ticking. It's up to you to decide whether you'll act in time to protect your future. Thank you for following along with this critical analysis. Don't wait for the collapse to catch you by surprise. Share this video with those who need to know, and make sure to subscribe for ongoing updates on how to navigate these tumultuous times. Stay prepared. Stay vigilant.